Chapter 112, The Final Gate 3. As Yom Ga from the Vermilion Slaughter Cave drew, 5. Mok Jiongun naturally became, 2. Mu Zhengyak, who was confident in winning despite drawing the most troublesome opponent, extended his hand to Mok Jiongun and said, "We ended up facing each other like this. Regardless of who wins, let's do our best." At these words, Mok Jiongun grabbed his hand and spoke as if it was troublesome. That seems difficult. What? If I do my best, the match will become too boring, so I'll go easy on you. So you do your best." Mu Zhengyak always had a relaxed demeanor, but at this moment one of his eyebrows twitched, revealing his emotions. Was Mok Jiongun provoking him now? Mu Zhengyak looked straight into Mok Jiongun's eyes. Unlike his own heightened state, Mok Jiongun's eyes showed no particular emotion. Seeing this, Mu Zhengyak calmed his briefly surging emotions and regained his composure. Has it already started? It was undoubtedly a clear provocation. The fellow was as good at strategy as he was, if not better. Perhaps he was trying to unsettle him before the match to gain an advantageous position. At this, Mu Zhengyak spoke with a smile. "I'm grateful that you're going easy on me. I was already at an advantage, but if that's the case, I'll have an overwhelming advantage. Are you not interested in the top disciple position in the final gate?" This was an eye for an eye. Mu Zhengyak also deliberately provoked Mok Jiongun. However, Mok Jiongun showed no particular reaction to Mu Zhengyak's provocation. Rather, he smirked and turned his head away. Seeing this, Mu Zhengyak clicked his tongue inwardly. Since childhood, he had often been told that he was as cunning as he was talented in martial arts. So he was confident that he wouldn't lose to anyone in a battle of wits or arguments. But strangely, whenever he had a conversation with this fellow, he felt like he was being swayed. No need to fall for the provocation. The outcome would be decided in the match anyway. He also intended to ignore it and move on. However, "Hey, Mok Jiongun." Mu Zhengyak called out to Mok Jiongun while looking ahead. After calling out, Mu Zhengyak inwardly regretted his actions, but since he had already called out, he thought it couldn't be helped. "Why are you doing this?" At Mok Jiongun's question, Mu Zhengyak said, "Since we're having a match, how about we make a bet?" "A bet? Yeah. Why should I do that?" Mok Jiongun spoke in a tone as if he didn't understand. At this, Mu Zhengyak smirked and replied, "You don't have to do it if you're not confident." "Confidence? Yeah. I thought it would be more interesting to have a bet rather than just a match. But if you're not confident, there's no need to do it." It was a clear provocation. He could have just let it slide, but Mu Zhengyak, who thought he should clarify this relationship in this match, tried to draw Mok Jiongun into a bet. Mok Jiongun stroked his chin and then smirked, saying, "What kind of bet do you want to make?" At these words, Mu Zhengyak inwardly cheered, although he didn't show it, thinking that Mok Jiongun had fallen for his provocation. Since the opponent had fallen for his provocation, all that was left was to set the stakes. Mu Zhengyak used his brain in an instant. Although he had suggested a bet to provoke him, he didn't want to create a situation where the opponent would resent or be angry even if they lost. So the idea he came up with was, how about the loser of the match calling the winner Big Brother? Big Brother. Yeah. Isn't it about clearly establishing a hierarchy between us? Hierarchy. It's not a bad bet, right? No matter how much of a competition it is, we're not mortal enemies or enemies that need to be killed, so there's no need to raise the stakes of the bet. It was enough to create a sense of urgency that he had to win. At his words, Mok Jiongun let out a soft groan and said, That's a rather boring bet." "It's boring. Yes. Is there even a need to make a bet with such a thing? Did he fall for it or not?" Mu Zhengyak asked in puzzlement. "Then what do you think is an interesting bet?" "Well, how about the loser of the match becoming the faithful dog of the winner?" "What?" At Mok Jiongun's words, Mu Zhengyak's expression stiffened. He had mentioned the bet at a level where both of them wouldn't feel too offended in case of any eventuality, but the fellow went a step further. Becoming a faithful dog basically meant crawling under him. He's not just good at provocation but excessive. He was someone who usually laughed off and let go of most things, but this time it was difficult to laugh. He was the one who first proposed the bet. But if he were to avoid it now that the stakes of the bet had been raised, he would look ridiculous. Mu Zhengyak slightly turned his head and looked at Mok Jiongun. Is he that confident? Or is he going to provoke me until the end? It didn't matter either way. The latter was definitely effective. From the moment he suggested making a bet to determine who would be the elder or younger brother, he had already been caught in the fellow's provocation. Mu Zhengyak clenched his fist as if he had made up his mind and said, "Are you sure you won't regret it? That's what I want to ask you. You're really something. I've never been caught by anyone in an argument or something like this. Fine, let's do it. The bet about becoming a faithful dog if you lose. It would be fine as long as he won." Although Mok Jiangun had a special power, this was a match where martial arts would be compared. He was confident that no one could match him if it was solely based on martial arts. Because he had that. And so, the two trainees belonging to the first bracket of the final gate walked to the center of the plaza, faced each other and stretched their bodies. They were Mok Jiangun and Mu Zhengyak. The observers sitting next to the stage in the plaza had various expressions on their faces. Among them, the Bright Blade King Sun Yun, who had come to confirm Mok Jiangun's martial arts skills, was surprised by something unexpected. Sun Yun gestured for one of the red-belted warriors to come and asked, "What was that child's name again?" "It's Mu Zhengyak." "Mu Zhengyak? Do you know which martial clan he's from?" "He seems to be from a small to medium-sized faction under our sect, but I don't know much else." At the warrior's words, Sun Yun's eyes narrowed. Such a child was from a small to medium-sized faction that wasn't well known? At that moment, the Thunderbolt Fist King Won Byung-hak, who was sitting right next to the Bright Blade King Sun Yun, also spoke in a surprised tone. "This is surprising. Was there such a child?" "You noticed it too, my lord?" The energy emanating from Mu Zhengyak as he was stretching his body. They sensed it through their energy perception. That child has reached the pinnacle stage of peak realm. For a trainee who was only 17 or 18 years old to have reached the pinnacle stage of peak realm, if their energy perception wasn't wrong, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was the most outstanding among those six. It was truly unexpected. For such an outstanding martial talent to emerge from a small to medium-sized faction, the opponent is unfavorable. After looking at Mu Zhengyak like this, the Bright Blade King Sun Yun, who turned his gaze to Mok Jiangun, clicked his tongue inwardly. He had wanted to confirm the extent of Mok Jiangun's skills, who had defeated his disciple Yip Weixian, but the opponent was too bad. Of all people, he had to face such a monstrous fellow. If he hasn't prepared anything, it might end uneventfully. It was difficult to judge everything based solely on energy perception, but there was too much of a difference in the energy emanating from them. No matter how much Mok Jiangun had honed his energy, it seemed difficult for him to be a match. On the other hand, the Thunderbolt Fist King Won Byung-hak, who had no particular interest in Mok Jiangun from the beginning, clicked his tongue while looking at Mu Zhengyak. Was I too hasty? He had come with the sole purpose of bringing the child from the esoteric realm gate. So he had already reached an agreement with a few of the observers beforehand. But to think there was such a talent, although he tried not to show it, he felt regretful. I can't back out now. Won Byung-hak glanced at the other executives. The Shadow Clan Master and the Summoning Sound Valley Master Hang Yiriang were sitting side by side, separated from them on the left side. The two of them also seemed to be having a conversation while looking at Mu Zhengyak. Hang Yiriang spoke to the Shadow Clan Master in an interested tone. I came to take a girl, but there's a not-so-bad boy among the boys. A girl? Could it be that you've set your eyes on the child from the Demon Fire Hall? Ho ho. I heard she's a promising talent. This is quite troubling. I also came to Corpse Blood Valley after a long time because I was attracted to the child from the Demon Fire Hall. Oh my, is that so? We have overlapping interests. It turned out that way unintentionally. Oh ho ho. The Shadow Clan Master laughed like a woman, covering his mouth. Following the Shadow Clan Master, the Summoning Sound Valley Master Hang Yiriang also laughed, giggling. They were both laughing, but for some reason it sounded like they were having a battle of wits. Then Hang Yiriang pointed at Mu Zhengyak and said, "Clan leader, why don't you take that child instead? In terms of talent, he seems to be the best among this class." Well, the Shadow Clan Master showed a contemplative expression while stroking his chin. At this, the Summoning Sound Valley Master Hang Yiriang spoke in a tone as if she couldn't understand. Is there a reason to hesitate? Could it be that you're worried about the Thunderbolt Fist King and the Bright Blade King snatching him away? Oh ho ho. That's one reason, but my eyes are drawn to that child. That child. At the Shadow Clan Master's words, the Summoning Sound Valley Master Hang Yeoriang looked at Mok Jungun, who was lightly stretching his body on the opposite side of Mu Zhangyak. Although they were far apart, she was quite surprised by his handsome face. However, that was all. Based on energy perception, he seemed to be only at the first-rate level. At that age, being first-rate wasn't weak, but it was definitely not a level worth coveting as a disciple. At this she said, "His appearance is quite pleasing, but that's all. Surely you're not interested in him because of his appearance, are you? Oh ho ho. As they say, beauty is the icing on the cake, so it's good if the appearance is outstanding as well. If that's all, it's meaningless. Since he has come this far, wouldn't he have a hidden technique or two? Well, that could be possible. In the martial world, secret techniques and hidden skills existed. However, the opponent was too strong. Based on energy perception alone, that child named Mu Zhangyak had the potential to reach the initial stage Transcendent Realm at any time as long as he was supported by enlightenment. Although she had originally set her sights on Mo Harang, he was desirable to the point of coveting. Then Hang Yeoriang spoke as if it was for amusement. Then Shadow Clan Master. Shall we have a light bet? A bet? Yes. From what I hear, it seems you see potential in that child as well. So let's bet that the match will be decided within 3 moves. Of course, the winner will be that child named Mu Zhangyak. What are the conditions of the bet? How about betting the ownership of that girl? So that was your objective, Valley Master. Ho ho. You caught me. Hang Yeoriang preferred girls over boys. Since they both wanted the same thing, she proposed a bet to resolve it amicably. At this, the Shadow Clan Master smiled and said, "Not a bad idea. But since anyone can see the clear gap between those 2 children if we bet on the outcome, let's do it this way." What do you mean by, this way? I will bet that the match won't be decided within 3 moves. At the Shadow Clan Master's words, the Summoning Sound Valley Master Hang Yeoriang twitched her lips and then nodded. You won't go back on your word, right? Oh ho ho. A man's word is as good as 1,000 gold pieces. It seemed like a phrase that didn't suit him, but it didn't matter. Hang Yeoriang was confident that the match could be decided in just 1 move, let alone 3. The gap between the pinnacle stage of Peak Realm and a first-rate realm was too large. It might not even take 1 move, but if done well, the outcome could be determined in just 1 move. Corpse Blood Valley leader Li Jiom, who was on the stage, raised his hand and shouted, "Now, exchange greetings with each other." At this, Mok Jiangun and Mu Zhangyak, who had been stretching their bodies, looked at each other and cupped their hands together in a salute. As it was a match, they were told to exchange greetings as a sign of mutual respect. While saluting, Mu Zhangyak glanced at someone next to the stage. The Thunderbolt Fist King. He was the one Mu Zhangyak wanted to have as his master. The Thunderbolt Fist King was one of the top 3 masters in the Heaven and Earth Society when it came to barehanded techniques. His family was skilled in leg techniques and fist techniques, so Mu Zhangyak wanted to become his disciple and reach an even higher level. To make that happen as he wished, he had to become the top disciple in the final gate. Mu Zhangyak turned his gaze and looked at Mok Jiangun. Although he seemed to be only at the first-rate level based on appearance, after observing him several times, Mok Jiangun was estimated to be at peak realm. He didn't know how he had concealed his martial arts, but he definitely wasn't first-rate. Mu Zhangyak steeled his resolve while looking at Mok Jiangun. Establish a clear superiority. For the sake of the bet, he absolutely couldn't lose. Mu Zhangyak began to rapidly circulate the internal energy from his Danjian throughout his body. It was to decide the match early on, along with the signal from the Corpse Blood Valley leader. Absolutely no carelessness. From the start, he would use his full strength to break the fellow's will and achieve victory. While they were doing so, Corpse Blood Valley leader Li Jiom lowered his raised hand and shouted loudly, "Begin." As soon as Li Jiom's signal fell, Pat, Mu Zhangyak, who had been preparing by circulating energy throughout his body, kicked off the ground and launched himself towards Mok Jiangun. Fast. Mok Yuqion, who was watching this, exclaimed in admiration. He had guessed that Mu Zhangyak would be strong, but his current movement exceeded expectations. Indeed, he seemed to have reached the pinnacle stage of peak realm. Flowing water stirs chaos. 1. Papapapapak. Mu Zhangyak, who had charged in front of Mok Jiangun in an instant, unleashed a palm technique. The elegant palm strikes, like gentle ripples, beautifully weaved a pattern, targeting the vital points on Mok Jaeongun's upper body. How will you respond? Mu Zhengyak thought as he glared at Mok Jaeongun. Even if they had reached the same peak realm, those who had reached the peak were completely different in terms of strength and speed. At that moment, Mok Jaeongun moved back about half a step. Then, swish, 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 swish. Mu Zhengyak's eyes narrowed. Mok Jaeongun secured a distance of half a step and flexibly moved his upper body, dodging all the palm strikes. To easily evade the flowing water swaying disorder, where it was difficult to distinguish between false and true strikes. It was an unexpected response. Oh my! The Thunderbolt Fist King Won Byung-hak, who was watching their confrontation from beside the stage, couldn't hide his astonishment. Mok Jaeongun's movement was not at all that of a first-rate martial artist. To dodge techniques in such a manner, one had to be at a somewhat equal level. Did he conceal his martial arts? He had thought the match would end blandly. However, with the movement Mok Jaeongun had shown now, it became difficult to predict the outcome. As expected, the Bright Blade King Sun Yun was also intently watching Mok Jaeongun's movement. He had thought there would be a hidden technique, and indeed Mok Jaeongun was showing movements that surpassed the first-rate level. If it was to that extent, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he had reached the proficient stage of the peak realm or was close to the pinnacle stage of peak realm. Can he conceal his energy? Even he who had reached the transcendent realm couldn't accurately assess Mok Jaeongun's martial arts. It meant one of two things. Either Mok Jaeongun was a peerless master far superior to himself, or he had a special technique to conceal his energy. However, the former was impossible based on common sense, so the latter was more likely. No wonder that child was pushed back. Mok Jaeongun's current movement was a step above Yip Wai Xian. Could be confirmed just by seeing how he dodged the techniques. With this, it became difficult to predict who would win between the two of them. An opening. Mok Jaeongun, who had dodged all the palm techniques, stepped forward and threw a punch, aiming for Mu Zhengyak's face. In response, Mu Zhengyak leaped back to avoid the punch, and at the same time he kicked off the ground and raised his foot towards Mok Jaeongun's chin. Mok Jaeongun blocked Mu Zhengyak's instep and simultaneously tried to grab it. However, swish. Mu Zhengyak twisted his body and kicked Mok Jaeongun's shoulder with his foot. Bam! Shwa! Mok Jaeongun's body was pushed back about 5 steps. Landing on the ground and seeing this, the corners of Mu Zhengyak's mouth slightly rose. He was now certain about this. Mok Jaeongun's internal energy was weaker than his own. In that case, let's decide the match. Pat. Mu Zhengyak kicked off the ground and unleashed a fist technique with his right hand towards the pushed-back Mok Jaeongun. Accumulating fists dancing to completion. As the fists overlapped, they flew in with several false strikes swaying like a butterfly. Seeing this, Mok Jaeongun tried to increase the distance by using footwork. However, Mu Zhengyak's fist technique, like the 100 Steps Divine Fist of Shaolin, imbued with energy, pierced through the air as much as the distance widened and charged forward. I have no choice but to block. There was no other way, he had to use his hands. Mok Jaeongun raised his energy and extended his palm to block the fist technique. But at that moment, bam! From an angle he had never imagined, Mu Zhengyak's palm strike pierced Mok Jaeongun's right rib cage. Mok Jaeongun's body bent sideways to the right. Along with that, Mu Zhengyak's accumulating fists, dancing to completion's fist technique struck his chest. Bam! 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 Consecutive strikes were delivered, and Mok Jaeongun's body was pushed back more than 10 steps. Shwa! Ha! Exclamations of admiration flowed from various parts of the spectator seats. That was because the technique Mu Zhengyak had shown just now was something no one had expected. Even the Bright Blade King Sun Yun muttered in amazement. Right fist, left palm, 3. With his right hand he unleashed a fist technique, and with his left hand he unleashed a palm technique. It was unbelievable. It wasn't that he was using the same technique with both hands, but he was using different techniques with each hand. Oh my! The Thunderbolt Fist King Won Byung-hak also couldn't hide his astonishment at Mu Zhengyak's bizarre technique. At a glance, it seemed like a simple principle, but those who had learned martial arts knew that this was nearly impossible. Using different techniques with each hand meant having to think 2 things simultaneously, and if not careful, the energy circulation system could get tangled. To have mastered such a bizarre technique. He was truly an amazing child. Using two different techniques with one body. It was no different from facing two masters who had reached the pinnacle stage of peak realm. The match has tilted. Regardless of how he did it, if it had come to this, it was no exaggeration to say that the situation had already tilted in Mu Zhengyak's favor. Even without this, Mok Jiangun's cultivation seemed to be a step below Mu Zhengyak's. So by what means could he defeat such a monster? That will be difficult. The Bright Blade King Sun Yun also shared the same opinion. It was surprising that Mok Jiangun had concealed his skills, but the opponent was too bad. However, what? Mu Zhengyak, who had landed two techniques that were practically fatal blows to Mok Jiangun, didn't have a good expression. He had accurately hit two techniques with his hidden skill, right fist, left palm, the rib cage and the center of the chest. It was no exaggeration to say that these were fatal blows. However, at the same time he landed the techniques, he felt a strange sensation of his cultivation dispersing for a moment. Is it my imagination? At that moment, Mok Jiangun, who had been pushed back about 10 steps, straightened his body and cracked his neck. Crack, crack. Then he muttered as if talking to himself. I was going to finish it by dealing with you moderately, but this was unexpected. What? Mu Zhengyak furrowed his brows. After being hit by unexpected killing techniques consecutively, he was still putting on such a pretentious act, which was really something. It seemed he needed to finish it decisively. I'll put an end to that pretentiousness. Pat. Mu Zhengyak launched himself towards Mok Jiangun. Having revealed his hidden skill, he now intended to unleash it openly. Right fist, left palm, 3. Fists vast as the world. Flowing water, moving clouds, 5. Simultaneously unleashing fist and palm techniques. It created a situation as if two masters were attacking together. It's over. Just as he was certain of that. Is this roughly how it's done? Papapapapak. At that moment, Mu Zhengyak couldn't hide his shock. Mok Jiangun, who had been staring intently at him as he charged forward, nodded his head and then, like Mu Zhengyak, started using different techniques with each hand. Chapter 113, The Final Gate 4. At the moment when Mok Jiangun was pushed back, his ribs and chest were struck by Mu Zhengyak's secret technique. Swoosh. Ha! In an instant, exclamations of astonishment erupted from the spectators' seats beside the platform where the duel was being observed. And they were not alone. Even the other cadets waiting for their turn to duel couldn't help but be amazed by the scene unfolding before their eyes. So this is what it meant. Mok Yuqion clicked his tongue as he watched Mok Jiangun being pushed back. He had only one chance to gauge Mu Zhengyak's martial prowess, and that moment came to mind. Are you perhaps left-handed? Who knows? At the time, he had been puzzled by that ambiguous response for a moment before forgetting about it. However, after witnessing the right fist left palm technique, each employing different techniques, it made sense. This was not a method anyone could casually attempt. Impressive. Mok Yuqion was genuinely amazed. If one could wield different martial arts with each hand, it meant they could perform the work of two people alone. Since it wasn't being executed by two individuals in the first place, it could become even more precise. Of course, the very act of pulling it off was difficult as it required splitting one's thoughts. In any case, witnessing this aspect of Mu Zhengyak's potential, Mok Yuqion's heart raced with excitement, even giving him goosebumps. Thump, thump, thump. Indeed, the world was vast. To think such a monster existed among his peers. I was nothing more than a frog in a well after all. Coming here and having his eyes open didn't mean he could afford to be complacent. Mok Yuqion clicked his tongue as he looked at Mok Jiangun. It seemed he had truly met his match. It's futile. Even if he had mastered a unique technique, this duel was meant to demonstrate one's martial prowess, plain and simple. The reason for his sudden improvement remained unknown, but the opponent was too formidable. Mu Zhengyak could genuinely be called a true genius. Bam. Now it appeared Mu Zhengyak was about to end it. As he unleashed his right fist left palm technique, even Mok Yuqion felt at a loss as to how he would counter it if he were in Mok Jiangun's place. At the moment, other than creating distance, Mok Yuqion's eyes widened in that instant. Pow! He was so astonished that he sprang up from his seat. This is insane. For a moment he doubted his own eyes. Mok Jaeyoung was employing different martial arts techniques with each hand, just like Mu Zhengyak. With his right hand he executed sword techniques and with his left hand he wielded fist techniques. Is this possible? He wasn't just clumsily imitating. He was genuinely displaying proper techniques. Mok Yucheon couldn't help but be shocked by this sight. He was confident that the bizarre method of using different techniques with each hand, like Mu Zhengyak, couldn't be easily replicated even by supreme masters. So what on earth was happening? It can't be. Even seeing it he couldn't believe it. How could one imitate it after seeing it just once? He wasn't the only one surprised. Ha! Hang Yeoriang of the Summoning Sound Valley let out an astonished gasp, her eyes narrowing. She had already judged that the outcome was completely tilted in Mu Zhengyak's favor upon witnessing his right fist left palm technique. However, something entirely unexpected had occurred. He's imitating that? Wielding different martial arts techniques with each hand. It was a method that, contrary to the idea, was difficult to execute in practice. If it were easy, countless martial artists would already be employing different martial arts with each hand. The true genius was someone else, I see. She had considered Mu Zhengyak a rarely seen genius after witnessing his right fist left palm technique. But now that thought had changed in an instant. If Mok Jaeyoung had truly made Mu Zhengyak's technique his own in a flash after seeing it just once, then she might be witnessing a tremendous genius that appears only once every few centuries. Swoosh. Hang Yeoriang glanced at Shadow Master. Shadow Master also appeared greatly astonished, his mouth slightly agape, unable to take his eyes off Mok Jaeyoung. Who wouldn't be amazed upon seeing this? At this her eyes sparkled strangely. In the bet she had already practically lost. However, that no longer mattered. Mok Jaeyoung. Originally, she had no interest in the male students and had come only with the intention of taking Mo Harang of the Demon Fire Hall. But now that thought had completely changed. Letting go of such immense talent was out of the question. Could this ultimately be a good thing? Since she had lost the bet, she could use that as a pretext to concede the Demon Fire Hall's woman to Shadow Master and take this monstrous fellow instead, which would be far more advantageous. As this was happening, the tide of the battle noticeably shifted. Bam bam bam. Ugh. The sword techniques executed by Mok Jaeyoung's right hand struck the acupoints of Mu Zhengyak's left chest. The 6 roots, 1, Sun and Moon Owl, and the small C acupoint Sohee point, on his left arm, causing Mu Zhengyak's body to stagger and be pushed to the side. The variations in the sword techniques are too intense. While the fist techniques wielded by his left hand were simple and sturdy, making them easy to block, the sword techniques executed by his right hand were diverse in their variations, causing Mu Zhengyak to miss 3 moves. This monstrous guy. Mu Zhengyak was genuinely dumbfounded. He had initially thought that Mok Jaeyoung's right fist, left palm technique might be a temporary strategy to catch him off guard. After all, wielding different techniques with each hand required not only splitting one's thoughts but also a special qi circulation method, which Mok Jaeyoung couldn't have possibly mastered. However, bam 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 bam. The techniques Mok Jaeyoung displayed with both hands were by no means empty moves. He was truly executing different techniques. At this rate I'll lose. Mu Zhengyak, sensing the unfavorable situation, attempted to create distance. His mind was becoming too scattered. Normally, when employing the right fist left palm technique, the opponent would become flustered and fail to respond to both techniques simultaneously, but with Mok Jaeyoung also wielding the right fist left palm, the exchange of techniques had grown complicated. It's dizzying. Even Mu Zhengyak, the originator, felt dizzy. Thus, tap 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 tap. Mu Zhengyak utilized the lightness skill to try and create as much distance from Mok Jaeyoung as possible. However, Mok Jaeyoung wouldn't miss this opportunity. Where are you going? Bam. Mok Jaeyoung unleashed his body towards Mu Zhengyak without hesitation. TSK. Realizing it was futile, Mu Zhengyak gathered qi in the soles of his feet and stomped on the ground with his toes. Boom. Crack. The ground of the plaza shattered and rock fragments shot upwards. The fragments, infused with qi, became dozens of small projectiles flying towards Mok Jaeyoung. Naturally, he had no choice but to evade them. However, in that fleeting moment, swoosh, Mok Jaeyoung bent his knees backward and leaned his waist back, sliding across the ground as if to avoid the fragments. No way. How did he think to dodge by lowering his posture backward like that? His waist and leg strength were no joke. While it was impressive to evade in such an acrobatic manner, dodging like this would inevitably create a critical opening. Foolish. You've made a mistake. Bam. Not missing this chance, Mu Zhengyak twisted his body, leaping forward, and attempted to strike Mok Jiangun's abdomen with a vicious palm strike. It was at that very instant. Bam 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 bam. Erg. Mu Zhengyak had thought that in this posture, Mok Jiangun would have a blind spot and be unable to respond immediately. However, the moment he was about to deliver the palm strike, Mok Jiangun's body, which was almost lying down backward, spun sideways, repeatedly striking Mu Zhengyak's jaw with foot techniques. How in this posture? Thud. Unable to contain his shock, Mu Zhengyak fell backward. Phew. Mok Jiangun got up and looked at the fallen Mu Zhengyak. It seemed that having been hit in the jaw and face consecutively, his brain had been shaken, causing him to lose consciousness. The fifth move of the profound mystic foot technique, the whirlwind kick. Quite useful. It wasn't a technique meant to be used in this way, but when the posture was unbalanced, employing it could effectively draw out the opponent's carelessness. Chong Ryong's martial arts were indeed worthy of being called supreme. At that moment, Chong Ryong's voice reached Mok Jiangun's ears. You must have been quite eager to end it quickly. You think I wouldn't know? You added more power to the last move, didn't you? Ah, I've been caught. Mok Jiangun scratched his head. The original plan was to determine the victor using only techniques within the peak realm. However, while executing the whirlwind kick, he had increased the power he typically used from 20% to 30% in the final move. Well, isn't this still enough? He hadn't done anything that would expose his true abilities. Most of the leaders beside the platform were supreme masters of the transcendent realm, so to avoid revealing his actual strength to them, he had limited his power to 20% during the fight. Moreover, there were several instances where Mok Jiangun had noticed openings in Mu Zhengyak's defense but had let them slide. Don't let your guard down. If the crowd realizes that you've already reached the transcendent realm, they will go beyond recognizing your talent and start to be wary of you. Yes. I'll keep that in mind. Wasn't that why he was controlling his strength? Otherwise, Mu Zhengyak would have been lying on the ground long ago. Controlling his power while fighting seemed to have been the right decision. Thanks to that, I learned something interesting. As Mok Jiangun reached the transcendent realm, he could see the opponent's chi more clearly. Although not in great detail, he could roughly discern how Mu Zhengyak's chi circulation was structured. Interestingly, Mu Zhengyak's lower danjian was divided into two. It could be considered a unique form, which likely allowed him to execute different techniques with one body. Mok Jiangun applied this by drawing out some of the death chi from his middle danjian to wield different techniques. It's quite useful. If utilized well, it seemed convenient when fighting opponents of similar levels. In any case, had he achieved his objective to this extent? The goal in the final gate was to impress upon the observing leaders that he possessed exceptional talent while only displaying the peak realm. This should be sufficient, right? Of course, Mok Jiangun's intentions were conveyed. He had firmly imprinted his talent in the minds of the observing leaders. However, beyond that, a small confrontation was unfolding among the leaders on the platform. Brother Sun, it seems I'll have to take that Mok Jiangun kid as my disciple. At the words of one Byung-hak, the Thunderbolt Fist King Sun Yun, the Bright Blade King, raised an eyebrow and replied. What are you saying? Didn't you just say you had chosen the child from the Esoteric Realm Gate? I said I was considering it, but though, let me be honest. If I miss out on that child in today's closing ceremony, I feel like I'll regret it for a while. Is it acceptable for someone who has received the title of king to speak with a forked tongue? I said I had the child from the Esoteric Realm Gate in mind. When did I ever definitively state that I would take that child no matter what? And respectable brother Sun, you already have many excellent disciples, so why are you being greedy here? Greedy? Did you just accuse me of being greedy? If this isn't greed, then what is it? Before they knew it, the atmosphere between them had become quite hostile. Oh my! Li Jiom, the Corpse Blood Valley Master, felt perplexed. He needed to announce the end of the first duel, but the sudden confrontation between these two kings made it difficult. Chapter 114, Disciple Scramble. 1. This is troublesome. Li Jiyom, the Corpse Blood Valley Master, had intended to ascend the platform and announce the end of the duel. However, he had not expected a situation where the two most influential upper echelon members among the 5 kings would engage in a confrontation. I understand their intentions, but they went too far. Li Jiyom clicked his tongue inwardly as he glanced at Mok Jiang. In fact, he too had been unable to conceal his astonishment upon witnessing Mok Jiang replicating the profound principles of Mu Zhengyak's right fist, left palm technique in a single attempt during their duel. If it weren't for the fact that he knew his liege was possessing the boy, he would have been desperate to accept him as a disciple due to his innate martial talent, just like the others. In any case, to ensure smooth progression, he needed to intervene in their confrontation. Ahem. You too. However, just as he was about to speak, Shadow Master's voice came from the left side. Ho ho. I apologize for interrupting your conversation, but would it be alright if I said a word? As Shadow Master stepped in as if to mediate, the 2 kings whose emotions were about to escalate, simultaneously turned their gazes towards him. Among them, the more belligerent one, Sun Yun, the Bright Blade King, spoke in a somewhat sharp tone. What do you wish to say? It is nothing more than a remark, wondering if there is a need for you 2 esteemed individuals to damage your sentiments over a single talent in this gathering. Under normal circumstances, they would have quickly come to their senses upon hearing these words. However, this time was an exception. Passing all the gates of the Corpse Blood Valley meant that most of the qualities a martial artist should possess had been verified, and it signified that they possessed fierce survival skills as well. Not only that, but reaching the peak realm at the age of 17 and possessing innate martial talent to the extent of being able to replicate profound principles that even Transcendent Realm Supreme Masters couldn't casually attempt after witnessing them just once. Who would want to let go of such an individual? I understand what you are trying to say, Shadow Master, but this is a matter between the Thunderbolt Fist King and myself, so please do not interfere. Sun Yun, the Bright Blade King, issued a strong warning. On the other hand, One Byung Hak, the Thunderbolt Fist King, remained silent. It wasn't due to his gentlemanly nature, but because he had visited Shadow Master the previous night and requested him not to touch the child from the Esoteric Realm Gate. Ahem. He had resolved to be shameless, considering that he couldn't afford to let go of such a talent, but naturally he had to be mindful of the situation. Fortunately, he hadn't made such a request to the Bright Blade King, but he could only hope that Shadow Master wouldn't bring it up. At that moment, Shadow Master smiled and spoke. However, what is the point of you 2 deciding who will take the talent here? At those words, one of Sun Yun's eyebrows raised. Could it be that Shadow Master was also intending to participate in this talent scramble? With that, Sun Yun spoke in a warning tone. Don't tell me you're also after that child. Oh no. That's not what I meant. What I'm saying is that it would be futile for you 2 to engage in this debate if we follow the rules of the closing ceremony. Futile? What do you mean by that? Shadow Master pointed at Mok Jiang with his hand and spoke to the 2 puzzled kings. Although it's difficult to confirm without witnessing the duels of the other students, if that student were to pass the final gate as the top ranker. He trailed off, but everyone understood Shadow Master's implication. Come to think of it, with that level of martial talent, the probability of him passing the final gate as the top ranker was significantly high. If that were to happen, the choice would lie with the student. In the end, the debate over who would accept Mok Jiang as a disciple might become entirely futile. That's right. It's pointless for us to argue. Unlike those who agreed with Shadow Master's words, Heng Yioriang, the Valley Master of the Summoning Sound Valley, glanced at Mok Jiang with twinkling eyes. Mok Jiang sat on the ground, his arms crossed, watching the next duel. The next duel was between Mo Harang of the Demon Fire Hall, ranked 3rd, and Yun Muong of the Esoteric Realm Gate, ranked 4th. They were already engaged in a fierce battle. The confrontation between Mo Harang, who specialized in the swift assassination blade technique, and Yun Muong, who wielded the iron fist based on the external martial art known as the iron string technique, was quite intriguing. Should it be called a battle of lightness and heaviness? Bam 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 bam. As their chi consumption was still low and their stamina was sufficient, the duel between the 2 was evenly matched. However, judging solely by their fighting styles, it seemed that Mo Harang, who prioritized swiftness, would tire out faster than Yun Muong, as her movements were 2 to 3 times faster than his. As he was observing the duel, Who do you think will win? Chong Ryong asked. Without any hesitation, Mok Jaeyoung muttered quietly in response. Mo Harang. Ho. Your discernment has improved quite a bit. She shared the same opinion as Mok Jaeyoung. At a glance, one might think that Yun Muong, who was moving in a composed manner while employing the Iron Fist, would have an advantage as time passed, but the difference in their skill levels was evident. In Mok Jaeyoung's eyes, despite exchanging over 20 moves, Yun Muong still couldn't keep up with Mo Harang's movements, while she was gradually attacking his weak points. This alone indicated that Mo Harang was a step above Yun Muong. Damn it! As Mok Jaeyoung had predicted, Yun Muong was gradually becoming impatient. Yun Muong, whose iron string technique had only reached the 7th stage, had 3 vulnerable areas. They were his face, armpits and ankles. When the iron string technique reached its pinnacle, the entire body would become as hard as rock, resolving most of the weak points. However, Yun Muong still had vulnerabilities. Bam! Hiss! At some point, one of Mo Harang's daggers had penetrated the area near his armpit, one of his weak points. Yun Muong, who had been firmly holding his ground, finally employed footwork and retreated. With this she could be certain. Found it. An incomplete external martial art inevitably had weak spots. Now that she had found them, she could make her move. You're finished. Clang. Crack. As she released the dagger from her hand, the silver thread connected to it moved like a living snake, chasing after Yun Muong, who was trying to create distance. It persistently targeted his armpit, tormenting Yun Muong. Damn it! Enraged, Yun Muong tried to strike down the silver thread, but it entangled and coiled around his arm like a spider's web. Seeing this, Mok Jaeyoung chuckled. The outcome would soon be determined. Being at a higher level than himself and having his weak points exposed, it would be difficult for Yun Muong to endure. At that moment, Yom Jie from the Vermilion Slaughter Cave, or rather the evil spirit possessing him, approached Mok Jaeyoung and whispered in a low voice. My lord, what should we do? The evil spirit glanced at someone. It was Mok Yucheon. Although he knew that Mok Jaeyoung didn't have any particular feelings towards him, they were ostensibly brothers, so he was asking how to handle the situation. Without much contemplation, Mok Jaeyoung replied. Confront him at the level of the body's owner. Understood. The evil spirit occupying Yomga's body could display greater martial prowess, but doing so might unnecessarily draw attention, so there was no need for that. Besides, with the evil spirit's skill, even at Yomga's level, it would not be difficult to defeat Mok Yucheon. The experience of his previous life could not be ignored. At that moment, gasp! Mu Zhengyak, who had been lying unconscious beside them, woke up. Upon waking up, he struggled to regulate his breathing, sitting up and coughing, cough, cough. Seeing him like this, Mok Yucheon approached and spoke. Zhengyak, are you all right? Fuff, I'm fine. After coughing a few more times, Mu Zhengyak finally managed to catch his breath and raised his head. Then, with a bitter look in his eyes, he opened his mouth. As expected, I lost. You fought well enough. Mok Yucheon spoke in a regretful tone. He wanted to console him in a way that could lift his spirits, but there was no way to do so. Not only had he reached the pinnacle stage of peak realm, but he had even mastered the profound technique of the right fist left palm technique, which even peerless masters couldn't replicate. Yet he had still lost. His opponent had perfectly recreated his own technique after witnessing it only once. The opponent was simply the worst. Mok Jaeyoung. What on earth are you? He had thought that something had changed about him since the Yun Moksword manner, but this was a completely different level of existence. Even he, who was called a genius, felt a sense of inferiority compared to Mok Jaeyoung's martial talent. That fellow was a monster in itself. Phew. At that moment, Mu Zhengyak struggled to stand up. Mok Yucheon tried to stop him. Don't push yourself. Sit down and circulate your qi. You must be quite dizzy after being hit in the jaw and face. The fact that he had woken up this quickly was already remarkable. Despite Mok Yucheon's suggestion, Mu Zhengyak shook his head, saying he was fine, and then got up and approached Mok Jaeyoung. Mok Yucheon looked at him with puzzlement. Was he doing this because he couldn't accept the outcome of the duel? Thinking that a dispute might occur, Mok Yucheon approached to intervene. Plop. However, Mu Zhengyak sat down next to Mok Jaeyoung and spoke in a low voice. I lost. Oh, I lost to you. As promised, my lord. Oh no. I think you used the wrong form of address. At Mok Jiongun's words, Mu Zhengyak's cheeks trembled and then, I will serve you as my master. Please forgive me for not being able to properly show my loyalty in front of the leaders and their watchful eyes. Mok Yucheon, who had intended to intervene in case a dispute broke out, couldn't hide his bewilderment upon hearing their conversation. Master. What was this about? Why was Mu Zhengyak addressing Mok Jiongun as his master and submitting to him in such a humiliating manner? Could it be related to the promise they had mentioned earlier? As he was puzzled, Mok Jiongun looked at him with a smile and pointed his finger at a certain location. It was the training ground in the center of the plaza where the duel was taking place. Ah. Looking over there, the outcome of the duel had been determined. Ha. I lost. Yun Muong of the Esoteric Realm Gate, holding his blood-soaked right armpit, knelt on one knee in front of Mo Harang's dagger, acknowledging his defeat. This meant that it was now Mok Yucheon's turn to duel. Although he was curious about what had transpired between those two, he had to prepare for the duel first. Tiske. Mok Yucheon turned his body intending to leave. At that moment, good luck. Yes, master. Upon hearing the voice of Yongjie from the Vermilion Slaughter Cave addressing Mok Jiongun as master, Mok Yucheon froze in place. What was going on? He knew that person had been accompanying Mok Jiongun for some time, but master? Wasn't that a form of address typically used by slaves or servants? With that, Mok Yucheon turned around and spoke to Mok Jiongun in a dumbfounded tone. What have you done? What do you mean by that? Why are they calling you their master? What exactly have you done to them? In response to Mok Yucheon's question, Mok Jiongun chuckled and replied, I didn't do anything special. What do you mean you didn't do anything special? Then why are they addressing you as their master or whatever? Mok Yucheon. At that moment, the voice of Li Jiom, the Corpse Blood Valley master, resounded. Mok Yucheon bit his lip and turned around, walking towards the center of the plaza. While dealing with that fellow here in the Corpse Blood Valley, he had realized his devilish true colors. There was no doubt that he had played some trick. At that moment, he saw Mo Harang, who had won the duel, walking back to where the students were. Considering their friendship from being in the same team during the flag contest, Mok Yucheon spoke. Congratulations on your victory. Thanks. Step. As they approached each other, Mok Yucheon warned in a whisper. Stay away from that Mok Jiongun. I don't know what trick he played, but it seems like he's making the students around him serve him as their master. He was telling her this out of a sense of camaraderie as they had been on the same team. However, that advice. It's already too late. Upon hearing Mo Harang's voice as she passed by, Mok Yucheon's expression stiffened. So she was also serving Mok Jiongun as her master? Mok Yucheon turned his head and looked at Mok Jiongun with trembling eyes. Despite being brought here as a hostage, what the hell are you up to in this place? Thus, the duel between Mok Yucheon and the evil spirit possessing Yongjie from the Vermilion Slaughter Cave began. As he was observing the duel, a voice echoed in Mok Jiongun's ears. Hello. Mok Jiongun slightly furrowed his brows. What was this? This wasn't Chong Ryong's voice. The sound penetrated his ears, but it wasn't reverberating around him. It sounded as if someone was whispering directly into his ear. Mok Jiongun's eyes narrowed as he lightly scanned his surroundings. Where did that voice come from? At that moment, a chuckle was heard. At that moment, as Mok Jiongun was raising his vigilance, he detected the faint form of internal energy carried along with the reverberating vibration of the incoming sound. Swish. Mok Jiongun turned his head and looked at Hang Yeoriang, the valley master of the Summoning Sound Valley, who was sitting as a spectator beside the platform. Ha! At this, a glimmer of admiration flashed in her eyes. Ah yes. That fellow truly exceeded her imagination. When infusing internal energy into sound from a distance, it was difficult to discern who had spoken and pinpoint their location. Yet he had instantly found her from this distance. I must have him indeed. He was not someone she could afford to concede. Chapter 115, Disciple Scramble. At this distance, when infusing internal energy into sound, it was difficult to discern who had spoken and pinpoint their location. However, surprisingly, Mok Jiongun had found her after just 2 attempts. A mere brat who had merely reached the peak realm possessed such keen perception? Hang Yeoriang, the valley master of the summoning sound valley, clicked her tongue and smacked her lips. A strong sense of desire arose within her. How can I concede something like this? Even if most of the leaders were after him, she had no intention of yielding whatsoever. No, their opinions didn't matter anyway. There was only one thing to consider. It was a matter of successfully enticing Mok Jaeongun. Hang Yeoriang looked at Mok Jaeongun and spoke again, infusing internal energy into her voice. You're quite something. To find me instantly like that. At her words, Mok Jaeongun's eyes narrowed. He had simply looked at the center of the rippling energy waves and his guess had been correct. However, how did she do it? Without moving her lips? The sound was echoing in his ears. As he was puzzled, Hang Yeoriang said to Mok Jaeongun, "Why are you surprised?" Rather than being surprised, he found it intriguing. The method of transmitting sound over such a distance using qi seemed quite useful. Should it be said that it appeared suitable for secretly speaking to someone? Are you curious about how it's done? There was no way he wouldn't be curious. Mok Jaeongun lightly nodded his head. Then, shall I teach you? She suddenly offered to teach him this. Mok Jaeongun looked at her with puzzlement. Mok Jaeongun believed that everything had a corresponding price, so he thought there was no way that woman would teach him such a thing with pure intentions. It's quite fascinating, but not knowing it won't cause any inconvenience. With that, Mok Jaeongun chuckled and turned his head away. Hang Yeoriang slightly furrowed her brows. She had tried to pique his interest, but she hadn't expected him to refuse so readily. What an interesting kid. She hadn't demanded any compensation and had simply offered to teach him, yet this was the first time she had seen someone instantly end their displayed interest like that. Because of that, she became even more intrigued. Thus she continued, "The essence of sound techniques is to create vibrations in the air through sound. This can be considered a similar principle." What was this? He hadn't agreed to learn it, but as she explained the principle, one of Mok Jaeongun's eyebrows slightly raised. Regardless, Hang Yeoriang continued her explanation. Imagine touching cotton with your qi between your vocal cords and the root of your tongue at the Yanquan acupoint. 1. Generating internal energy and quickly creating vibrations. And even if he didn't want to listen, the continuous sound made it impossible for him not to understand the method. Moreover, surprisingly, the method wasn't very difficult. A clever kid like you should be able to do it sufficiently with this level of explanation, right? At her words, Mok Jaeongun slightly tilted his head to the side. Then looking at Hang Yeoriang, he followed her instructions, sending internal energy to the Yanquan acupoint and tried it once. Is this how it's done? Correct. Upon hearing his voice, Hang Yeoriang slightly raised the corners of her mouth. He was indeed intelligent. Even if the execution seemed easy, comprehending and performing it in one attempt was not a simple feat. He possessed the sharpness to grasp the principles that easily. He's a delightful child to teach. At that moment, Mok Jaeongun asked her, "It's impressive. What is this technique called?" The monks of Shaolin refer to it as the intention-sealing voice transmission. But the Valley Master and those who study sound techniques call it the secret voice transmission. In short, it's also referred to as voice transmission. Voice transmission. Is this a technique that others cannot hear? That's right. It's a technique truly suitable for having secret conversations like between you and me. Isn't it nice? Yes, it is. It certainly seemed like a useful technique. Using very faint qi to create vibrations and transmit sound. He had no particular desire to learn it, but since she had taught him on her own accord, it would likely come in handy. As they were conversing, she transmitted a message to him. "I watched your duel and it was truly magnificent. Thank you." Originally, the Valley Master had come to take a female disciple, but it was a duel that made me change my mind. At her words, Mok Jaeongun chuckled inwardly. She was openly revealing her intentions. As expected, there was a purpose behind teaching him this technique. Hearing you say that, I'm at a loss for words. Child, let me be direct. Become this Valley Master's disciple. Such opportunities are rare. Hang Yeoriang, the Valley Master of the Summoning Sound Valley, blatantly proposed for him to become her disciple. In fact, her proposal was indeed a rare occurrence. The final gate hadn't even ended yet, and the closing ceremony hadn't taken place. So approaching a student and persuading them to become a disciple was something that wouldn't happen unless they were exceptionally fond of them. However, the problem was that Mok Jaeongun himself had no intention whatsoever of becoming the Valley Master of the Summoning Sound Valley's disciple. Mok Jaeongun transmitted a message with a regretful expression. "Oh my, what should I do? I am truly grateful for the Valley Master's offer, but I need more time to consider it." He expressed it politely since she had taught him something. It was essentially no different from a refusal. At this, Heng Yuriang let out a small snort. "Do you think you can escape from this Valley Master?" She had already made up her mind to accept Mok Jaeongun as her disciple. Therefore, she was determined to make him beg her to accept him as a disciple, using whatever means necessary. "If you're considering the two kings, I'd like to tell you that it's a foolish choice." "A foolish choice?" Bright Blade King Sun Yun already has 4 disciples and a designated successor. If you were to join them, do you think you'd be able to fully showcase your talent? Is that so? From the looks of it, you must have thought of choosing Thunderbolt Fist King in mind. But do you know this? What are you referring to? The Thunderbolt Fist King's only disciple became crippled in his right arm while learning his secret techniques. At her words, Mok Jaeongun stroked his chin. In fact, he hadn't chosen anyone yet. Originally, he had his sights set on Baek Saha, the Poison Annihilation King, but since he didn't attend as a spectator, his original plan had been disrupted. However, if what Heng Yuriang said was true, becoming a disciple of the two kings might turn out to be quite troublesome. Internal competition or the risk of martial arts? Whichever it was, it became unpleasant to choose. However, this information was ultimately Heng Yuriang's attempt to exclude these two individuals. Therefore, Mok Jaeongun considered it as information to be referenced, nothing more, nothing less. "Yes, I will keep the Valley Master's advice in mind." At Mok Jaeongun's words, which seemed to draw a line, she tapped her fingers on the chair. This kid seemed to be more stubborn than he appeared. If it weren't for the final gate or the closing ceremony, she would have wanted to forcibly take him away and reshape his mental state to her liking. However, the most troublesome person was right across the platform. Bright Blade King Sun Yun. He was someone who interfered and obstructed her affairs at every turn. But now that time was not far off. Once she reached the 7th stage, the pinnacle of the sound wave transmission technique, no one would be able to stand against her except for the 2 among the 5 kings who had attained the realm of awakening. Even the Bright Blade King was no exception. Thus, she decided to change her approach and try to coax and persuade Mok Jaeongun this time. "Do you know why this Valley Master only wanted to accept female disciples? This valley has always accepted mostly female disciples, except in truly special cases. And it's not limited to disciples. The majority of those in my valley are women. If you become this Valley Master's disciple, you'll be able to enjoy the feeling of being the first emperor of the Ipang Palace, too. Doesn't it tempt you?" "I apologize." Mok Jaeongun flatly refused her temptation. Look at this brat. He should be at an age where his blood was boiling, yet he even rejected such a proposal? At this sight, Heng Yuriang's annoyance started to rise, going beyond his stubbornness. Originally, she had a whimsical temperament and didn't engage in persuading others or such acts. If she liked something, she would forcibly take it, that's all. If he keeps responding like this. Her patience was reaching its limit, but she decided to endure it one last time. "From what I can see, you seem to be learning sword techniques. In that case, wouldn't it be even better to become this Valley Master's disciple?" "What do you mean by that?" "The Bright Blade King and the Shadow Master are masters of blade techniques, and the Thunderbolt Fist King, as his title suggests, is a master of the Thunderstrike Fist. However, judging from the duel, it seems that what you primarily trained in is sword techniques." She considered Mok Jaeongun's sword techniques to be more refined than his fist techniques during the duel. In that regard, she deduced that Mok Jaeongun had mainly practiced sword techniques. At that moment, Mok Jaeongun spoke. "As far as I know, the Valley Master is primarily skilled in sound techniques." While that is certainly true, the Valley Master is also a master of the sword comparable to my own sound techniques. I can confidently say that if you learn the Striking Sword Technique 3, one of my valley's legacies, you will reach an even higher realm of swordsmanship. Striking Sword Technique? Did she also have proficiency in sword techniques? However, there was one fact that Heng Yuriang was unaware of. Mok Jaeongun smiled and said, "I am grateful for your words, but I don't necessarily have to focus on sword techniques. Although she didn't know, Mok Jaeung-un hadn't devoted himself solely to the sword. He was prepared to learn whatever he deemed necessary. However, Mok Jaeung-un's response ultimately angered Hang Yeoriang. Tiske. This valley master is offering such a proposal, yet he keeps arrogantly refusing. If carrots didn't work, then the answer was the whip. In fact, that was more convenient for her. This valley master is holding you in such high regard and trying to accept you as a disciple, yet you are being utterly arrogant. Very well. In that case, I'll have to accept that Mok Yucheon brat who is currently engaged in a duel as a subordinate of my valley. Mok Yucheon? Mok Yucheon and the evil spirit possessing Yom Jie from the Vermilion Slaughter Cave were in the midst of a fierce duel at the training ground in the center of the plaza. They were almost evenly matched. Most of the leaders were also watching their duel with interest. I heard that the child is your younger brother, right? Before the duel, when one Byung Hak, the Thunderbolt Fist King, learned that the two shared the same surname Mok, he had asked if they were siblings. In response, Lee Jiom, the Corpse Blood Valley Master, deemed it acceptable to reveal that information and confirmed it. That was how she knew about it. Yes, that's correct. I see. That child also seems quite useful. Don't you think? If he's such a useful talent, I should accept him as a subordinate, play with him for a while and then kill him when I lose interest. At her words, Mok Jaeung-un couldn't help but chuckle. As he continued to express his refusal, she was now blatantly threatening him. Although she spoke indirectly, she was threatening to take his younger brother as a subordinate and kill him if Mok Jaeung-un didn't become her disciple. Try refusing again this time. She twitched her lips and looked at Mok Jaeung-un with malicious eyes. Considering that both siblings had made it to this stage, they must have relied on each other while passing through the gates. In that case, their brotherly bond should be deep. If you don't want to let your younger brother die, obediently become the Valley Master's disciple. Do as you please. Suddenly, upon hearing Mok Jaeung-un's transmitted voice echoing in her ears, her expression, which had been twitching her lips venomously, stiffened. What did he mean by doing as she pleased? For a moment she doubted her own ears. Hang Yeoriang spoke in a voice mixed with anger. You must think that this Valley Master wouldn't actually do it. She was someone who followed through on her words. How dare a mere student not listen to her words and respond in such a manner? Fine. Then she would truly show him. It's all your own doing. Let's see if you can remain so composed after losing your younger brother. Yes. Do as you please. Ha. You can kill him, I don't mind, and you can even dismember him and turn him into a cripple after playing with him. After all, that's the Valley Master's decision for the subordinate you're taking in. What? If my younger brother can make the Valley Master happy even in such a way, that would be quite fortunate. Tiske. He says that with a smile on his face. Suddenly, rather than her anger rising, she was left dumbfounded. What was wrong with that brat? Although there was a distance between them, as someone who had reached the transcendent realm, she could see Mok Jaeung-un's face to a certain extent. How could he smile and say it was fine to kill his younger brother or turn him into a cripple? It wasn't an expression of pretending to be composed while scheming something. His face truly seemed to convey that he didn't mind. Is that kid really in his right mind? Chapter 116E Disciple Scramble 3. How could he smile and say it was fine to kill his younger brother or turn him into a cripple? It wasn't an expression of pretending to be composed while scheming something. Is that kid truly insane? Hang Yeoriang herself was notorious for her eccentric and whimsical temperament, but this was the first time she had encountered someone like him. It wasn't a deliberate display of bravado. Did that imply that the brotherly bond between the two wasn't particularly deep? Occasionally, there were those who even targeted each other's lives while competing for the position of family heir, so it was possible. This type of threat is meaningless. The desire to forcibly drag him away at once grew stronger. At that moment she heard someone's voice in her ear. Valley Master Hang. Contacting a student before the closing ceremony is a violation of the rules, it seems. Flinch. Startled, she turned her head to the side. The owner of the voice was Shadow Clan Master. Shadow Clan Master's gaze remained fixed on the ongoing duel. She furrowed her brows at this. Impossible. The secret voice transmission is a technique that transmits sound only to a specific recipient, so he shouldn't have been able to hear it. No matter how high one's realm was, this technique couldn't be overheard. However, how did he realize that she was attempting to contact Mok Jaeung-un? As she was contemplating this, Shadow Clan Master spoke as if reading her thoughts. If you stare too blatantly, it becomes noticeable. What are you talking about? She feigned ignorance. Shadow Clan Master then spoke with his characteristic laughter. Oh ho ho. The Summoning Sound Valley sect, the sound wave transmission sect, has many unique techniques related to sound, I hear. Among them, there's a technique called the secret voice transmission that allows one to convey their intentions to a specific person. Isn't that right? At Shadow Clan Master's words, Hang Yiriang's expression turned cold. She knew that Shadow Clan Master primarily dealt with confidential matters, but she had no idea he was aware of the secret voice transmission, one of her sect's techniques. If that was the case, you've been continuously monitoring me. She thought she had escaped the watchful eye of the clan leader, but it seemed that wasn't the case. As she was feeling perplexed, Shadow Clan Master continued speaking without even glancing at her. It's a technique I truly wish to learn. However, even within the sect, there are laws and rules to be observed, so I hope the Valley Master will keep that in mind. She didn't respond. Although she felt displeased about him knowing her sect's technique, it wouldn't be beneficial to clash with Shadow Clan Master, the eyes and ears of the clan leader. Ooh! At that moment, exclamations erupted from various directions. The reason for this was the duel unfolding in the training ground of the plaza. Ho! Even Shadow Clan Master's eyes narrowed as if surprised. It was understandable, as the duel had been almost evenly matched from the beginning. However, most had predicted Yongjie from the Vermilion Slaughter Cave to be the victor of this duel. This was because, judging from the techniques Yongjie displayed during the duel, he seemed to be a highly experienced master, targeting only the most opportune moments. On the other hand, Mok Yucheon appeared to lack dueling experience but compensated for it with his exceptional instincts. But in the end, experience is the key. Thus, it was believed that as time passed, Yongjie would gain the advantage. Shadow Clan Master shared the same opinion. However, cough. Black blood was flowing from the mouth of Yongjie, who was kneeling on one knee in the training ground. What on earth had happened? Mok Jaeongun, with narrowed eyes, looked at Mok Yucheon standing in front of Yongjie. Ha! Ha! Mok Yucheon was exhaling rough breaths. A faint red haze was rising from his body, and his skin had completely turned a brown hue. Even the whites of his eyes had turned brown, making his appearance extremely bizarre. What is that? Even the masters of the Heaven and Earth Society, who had relatively open minds regarding martial arts, were astounded, as they had never seen such a sight before. Bright Blade King Sun Yun crossed his arms and muttered. His power has nearly doubled. As someone with the keenest perception among them, it was evident to him. Just a moment ago, Mok Yucheon, who was merely at the beginning of the peak realm, had his power surge rapidly after transforming into that state. He was almost surpassing the pinnacle stage of peak realm. Thunderbolt Fist King Won Byung-hak also frowned and spoke in a tone of incomprehension. Could it be that the child has mastered an evil technique? Evil techniques. In martial arts, it refers to mastering techniques in a manner that deviates from the established paths. Among the masters of the demonic sects, there were occasionally those who mastered evil techniques and rapidly advanced their martial arts. However, such methods had significant side effects since they deviated from the normal path. For instance, due to the exceptionally rapid growth, it would be difficult to progress beyond a certain level, or the meridians would become twisted, or one would fall into a state of delusion due to incorrect qi circulation methods. Bright Blade King Sun Yun, looking at Mok Yucheon's brown eyes, said, "If he has mastered an evil technique, we may need to subdue that child." One of the biggest problems with evil techniques was that as the energy rapidly increased, it would affect the brain, causing one to lose rationality and run amok. Looking at Mok Yucheon's current state, he was definitely not normal. "Ha! Your creation is finally showing its true colors, mortal." Chong Ryong's voice echoed in his ear. Mok Jaeongun also slightly nodded his head. The ignited wood heart transformation method, the exclusive cultivation method of the Yun Mok Swordmanner's head, was an ascending martial art but definitely not an evil technique. Rather, it properly followed the principles of righteous cultivation. However, the issue was that Mok Jaeongun had arbitrarily changed the mnemonics of the technique Mok Yucheon had mastered. As expected, it seemed that the side effects had finally manifested. In fact, since he had tampered with the ascending martial art, the ignited wood heart transformation method, it wouldn't have been strange if such an incident had occurred at any time. The fact that it had only happened now could be considered fortunate. Judging from his appearance, he's close to a state of rampage. If he's unlucky, his meridians may completely rupture and he could die on the spot. At Chang Ryong's words, Mok Jae-un twitched the corners of his mouth. Is this a good thing? Mok Jae-un had intended to dispose of Mok Yucheon at an appropriate time. However, if he were to lose his life due to the side effects of the cultivation method in front of everyone like this, it would be convenient as there would be no need for him to take action. However, the evil spirit's condition seemed worse than expected. Cough. Cough. Just now, as Mok Yucheon's power had surged rapidly, the evil spirit had been struck in the chest, and he was continuously coughing up blood. The evil spirit, with his head lowered, glanced at Mok Jae-un. From his appearance, it seemed as if he was asking what to do. As an evil spirit, he should be able to regulate the possessed body to alleviate the injuries to a certain extent, but judging from his behavior, it must not be an ordinary injury. However, if Mok Yucheon were to use that flawed cultivation method a bit more, it could further aggravate the side effects. Mok Jae-un chuckled and transmitted a message. Just endure it for a while and confront Mok Yucheon. It was at that very moment. Thud. Suddenly, the evil spirit's eyes rolled back and he collapsed. What on earth had happened? Although an evil spirit possessing a body would be affected by it to a certain extent, the body was essentially no different from clothing, so he should have been able to control the pain. However, why did he faint? Swish. At that moment, Mok Jae-un slightly furrowed his brows. It was because the evil spirit possessing Yeom-ga's body had left it. Why did he suddenly leave the body? As he was puzzled, the evil spirit spoke to Mok Jae-un. What? He's dead. Surprisingly, the reason the evil spirit had left the body was that Yeom-jae from the Vermilion Slaughter Cave had breathed his last. Naturally, Mok Jae-un had thought he would easily win. However, that expectation had been shattered. At the evil spirit's words, Mok Jae-un looked at Mok Yucheon with narrowed eyes. According to the evil spirit, at the moment when he thought the match was over and was about to finish it, he had been caught off guard by a surprise attack, and after that the meridians in his chest had suddenly begun to rupture. He had tried to arbitrarily repair the injured areas, but the meridians were rupturing at too fast a pace, leaving him with no options. What a coincidence. Pardon. Is this what they call a blind fish getting caught? It was difficult to understand what Chang Ryong meant. At that moment, Mok Yucheon, still in his bizarre state with his entire body discolored, approached the fallen body of Yeom-jae and tried to reach out his hand. Right then, bam, someone blocked his way. It was Guak Mun-ji, the senior warrior who assisted Lee Ji-yeom, the Corpse Blood Valley master. The match is over. Stop. Guak Mun-ji, with a somewhat tense expression, extended his hand and showed wariness towards Mok Yucheon. It was understandable, as Mok Yucheon's appearance was extremely dangerous to anyone's eyes. He was in a state where he could go on a rampage at any moment. As Guak Mun-ji was on guard, Mok Yucheon retreated about 2 steps back. His rationality still remains. At this, senior warrior Guak Mun-ji felt relieved inwardly. If he had lost his rationality and gone berserk, it would have been a dangerous situation where they would have had to subdue him in some way. Swish. With that, Guak Mun-ji placed his finger on the neck of the fallen Yeom-jae. Then he frowned and looked at the platform. Upon seeing his expression, Lee Ji-yeom, the Corpse Blood Valley master, stiffened. Oh no. He had sent him to confirm whether Yeom-jae was alive or dead because his collapsed state looked ominous. However, judging from that expression, it seemed his concerns had become reality. It was truly a perplexing situation. Deaths occurring in the Corpse Blood Valley's gates weren't a significant issue, but if a talent like Yeom-jae from the Vermilion Slaughter Cave were to die here, it would be an extremely regrettable occurrence. Of all places, it had to happen in the final gate. At that moment, upon seeing senior warrior Guak Mun-ji's reaction, Mok Yucheon couldn't hide his bewilderment. What is this? Mok Yucheon had no intention of killing Yeom-jae in this duel. However, the moment he circulated the ignited wood heart transformation method, he had been unknowingly gripped by an immense murderous intent. He couldn't fathom the reason. Even now, a strong urge was boiling inside him and he was in the mood to run wild at any moment. Nevertheless, Mok Yucheon suppressed it with extreme perseverance. Stop it. Sizzle sizzle sizzle. Then gradually the color of Mok Yucheon's skin began to lighten. Upon seeing this, a glimmer of admiration appeared in the eyes of a few leaders. He's suppressing the urge? To them, Mok Yucheon's behavior was quite refreshing. Judging from the rapid increase in power and the bizarre skin discoloration, it was close to a state of pre-rampage due to the side effects of an evil technique. However, he had managed to suppress and control it on his own. Look at this kid. To some, this was quite a novel sight. Even with a considerably strong willpower, it would have been difficult to overcome the urge. Yet at that age he displayed such perseverance. On the other hand, Mok Jae-eun smacked his lips as if disappointed. What a pity. He had hoped for Mok Yucheon to go berserk and die on the spot, but instead he had endured it. Could be said that he was lucky. Chong Ryong, who seemed to share the same sentiment, agreed with him. What a fortunate mortal. Indeed. But it's quite interesting. What was interesting about it? As he was puzzled, she spoke. The fact that the mnemonics you arbitrarily changed without much thought are having such an effect. He had nothing to say about that. Who would have predicted that the power would surge so rapidly and cause such a bizarre phenomenon of damaging the meridians just by haphazardly altering the mnemonics? However, the fact that the altered cultivation method was dangerous remained unchanged. About half an hour passed like that. The situation had taken an ironic turn. The reason for this was that Mo Harang from the Demon Fire Hall, Mok Jae-eun's opponent for the next duel, had forfeited, stating that she had no confidence in winning the duel. However, with this development, the contenders for the top spot in the final gate had become Mok Jae-eun and Mok Yucheon. This made the leaders who had come as spectators unable to hide their astonishment. Who would have imagined that siblings from the same martial family would compete for the top spot? It was also a first in the history of the Corpse Blood Valley's gates. Moreover, two siblings who were brought here as hostages are competing. Oh ho ho. Among the spectators, Shadow Clan Master, one of those who knew the identities of the Mok siblings, found this situation quite intriguing. On the other hand, Bright Blade King Sun Yun, who had directly brought them here, clicked his tongue inwardly. How did this happen? Initially, he had thought that these two would lose their lives in the Corpse Blood Valley, but he had never anticipated such an outcome. If this fact were to spread within the Heaven and Earth Society, it would cause a huge controversy. The mere fact that two youngsters from a righteous sect, who weren't even members of the Heaven and Earth Society and had been brought here as hostages, were competing for the top spot in the Corpse Blood Valley's gates was quite a blow to their pride. No, it was even an unpleasant occurrence. The sect leader has made a bad move. If he hadn't sent them here in the first place, such a situation wouldn't have occurred. However, these two had survived until the end. And according to the laws of the Corpse Blood Valley, they had even gained the opportunity to become disciples of the Heaven and Earth Society's leaders. Even the sect leader couldn't have foreseen this. There's no other choice now. In this situation, it was better to thoroughly transform those two into people of the Heaven and Earth Society. That way they could be turned into symbols. As excellent symbols of betrayal, abandoning the righteous sect, which could be considered the roots of the later generation of the righteous pathway, and growing as talents of the Heaven and Earth Society. Now, you two face each other. At that moment, Lee Ji-yeom, the Corpse Blood Valley master on the platform, called them to the training ground and had them face each other. Thus, the two siblings found themselves standing face to face. Then begin the duel. Lee Ji-yeom shouted as he lowered his raised hand. As the starting signal was given, Mok Yucheon assumed a ready stance and spoke with a face full of anger. You jerk. What? Mok Jae-eun nonchalantly asked back. Then Mok Yucheon narrowed the distance step by step and confronted him. You didn't properly teach me the cultivation method. At first he hadn't been suspicious. It was because he had gone through multiple confirmation processes. However, after coming here and experiencing Mok Jae-eun's true nature, he became convinced. That bastard definitely hadn't properly taught him the mnemonics of the Ignited Wood Heart transformation method, which was exclusively for the head of the family. Because of you, consumed by murderous intent, he had killed someone during the duel. And even now he couldn't control it and was forcibly suppressing it. No matter how estranged they were as siblings, as long as they were from the same family, he hoped that Mok Jae-un would at least feel remorse, if not take responsibility for his side effects. However, Mok Jae-un smiled and said, "You're realizing it only now? You're truly a magnificent fool. You." Mok Yucheon, with anger surging to his head, launched himself towards Mok Jae-un. He was about to unleash the best techniques he was capable of, but, bam. At that moment, Mok Jae-un, with lightning speed, flicked his wrist and grabbed his neck, slamming him to the ground. Boom. Ugh. Then he whispered in his ear, "How do you expect to do anything to me like this? Why don't you try using that cultivation method instead?"